and welcome to this short video covering assessment guidance for the interview assessment which is coming up. So this is the first major assessment. Okay, so there's a number of tasks involved in this assessment. The first task is to find somebody to interview. Now this can be a classmate or a close friend or a family member or a work colleague. Do not interview a stranger at all. Do not interview someone that you are that you have a power relationship with. So if someone is dependent on you, so don't interview a patient, an employee, a student, someone you coach or train, or children, including your own. Okay. So I want you to interview somebody. I want you to use the interview schedule with the questions that are provided on Canvas. This is exactly the same interview schedule that you used in your practice interview in week 3 tutorial. And I want you to conduct a 20-minute interview. So 20 minutes is going to mean that you'll have to do more than just ask the questions in that interview schedule. So I want you to develop appropriate focused questions, probes, and prompts, and use the listening skills that we discussed in the lecture. So the research question that's driving this is, how do lay people understand the concept of health? So the second task is where you first start to get some marks. So these are really easy marks to get. So we want you to transcribe a 20-minute section, that's the maximum amount, of the interview recording. So it might be that you did a 20-minute interview, so you transcribe it all. You might have done a 25-minute interview, just transcribe 20 minutes of it. We have provided a transcription template with some guidelines for you to use. Use it. So if you want the maximum 2 marks available for this task, you must use the transcription template and do not change it. So you'll see there's a header, a footer, there's particular ways of labeling the interviewer and the participant, there's a font, there's line spacing, hanging indents, all of that stuff is all outlined in that transcription template. Use it and don't mess with it. You get the full 2 marks. And one of the questions that's been coming up recently is around using automatic transcription software. So you'll find on the assessment page, we've linked to some free software so that you can manually transcribe. There's lots of free ways of having your audio transcribed automatically. You're welcome to use them, but you will lose marks if it looks like your transcript has not been checked and corrected. Transcription software that works automatically is not perfect, not close to perfect. So you need to make sure that you've reviewed the content. You also will need to make sure that you've used the transcription template that we've provided. So I don't really mind how you transcribe it, as long as you're transcribing it within the template and using the specific transcription conventions that we have asked you to use. For full transparency, I'm showing you the marking matrix. So you'll get the full marks if you precisely follow the transcription template and there's no grammatical, spelling, punctuation errors. Now there might be, your participant might use the wrong words. They might start a word and not finish it. They might use the wrong grammar. That's fine. So you don't need to correct them, but it should look like any errors that there are errors that there were in the recording. So the third task, again, some easy marks, and easy in terms of you should be getting all 8 marks here, but my markers are not going to be easy in giving them out. Okay, so here's the task. We want you to go through the transcript and highlight instances of you employing 4 skills that we've outlined in the lecture, interviewing skills. So we want you to find one example of each skill that you used. So I did this thing, and then we want you to find skills that you didn't use. So 4 different skills that you didn't use. So here's 4 skills that I employed in the interview, and here are 4 places where I didn't use the skill, but I should have, or I could have. And briefly explain how each instance you highlight is an example of the skill you've selected. So remember, this assessment is not about whether you do a good interview or not. You're all novice interviewers. This assessment is about you being able to reflect on your performance and be critical about your own use of skills and how you've gone. So this is about you being reflexive. So you get 1 mark for each skill you appropriately identify and justify, and you should be identifying 8 different skills in total. So let me skip ahead. Here are the skills. So you'll find this again on the assessment page. All of these are things that we've talked about in the lecture, and you will have practiced all of these things in your practice interviews. So listening. So this is actively listening as a way of so the way that you do this is you demonstrate that you've listened by tailoring your next question in response to what a person has said. So you might reflect on something that they've said, in terms of what they've just told you. You might reflect, you might make a connection to something that they said earlier and ask how that connects to the thing that they've just said. But I can see in the transcript that there's evidence of the fact that you're actively listening. It's not about summarizing what the person had said. It's about being appropriately responsive. And it's not simply about being quiet or giving them space to talk. It's a much more active skill. Probing is a follow-up question that encourages the participant to elaborate on a topic or explore an idea, event, or experience in greater depth. Something as simple as, what made that important to you? You should practice these things and come up with, it's worth having a look through the interview schedule and writing yourself out some probes that you think you might find useful. Clarifying. So this skill is using a follow-up question to check your understanding or to find out what your participant means by a specific point. So you might say, can you remind me when that happened? Or can you tell me again about how that unfolded? So clarifying. Orienting to the specific is a follow-up question that encourages the participant to talk about actual events or experiences instead of talking in generalities. So we don't really want people to be just talking at the kind of level of what happens in general or what they feel in general. We want to know about specific times so that we can understand the context. So can you describe the last time that happened? Or can you tell me about a specific time that happened? Non-directive probing is using appropriate encouragements like or sometimes silence to encourage a participant to keep talking. This can be a bit tricky to see in a transcript. So it's not just about a gap in the transcript. In some ways, the best evidence of non-directive probing is about what happens after it. So you can see that the participant has felt like they were being encouraged. Transitioning. So this is about moving slowly between topic questions so the interview does not feel like a question and answer session. So you'll notice when you have a look at the interview schedule, there's a couple of questions that are kind of quite general. What do you think about health? Then it shifts into thinking about specific people who are examples of good health and not so healthy. And then it shifts again into thinking about people, the participant themselves and how they think. So you could potentially use some transition points to say, okay, so now we're going to think about your own experience, or so now we're going to move away from thinking about the general and thinking quite specifically about people in your life. So it's kind of demonstrating to the person and creating a flow. But it might also just be shifting between individual questions. Questioning as a skill is about the appropriate use of open-ended and closed questions, not double-barreled and not confusing. So we've talked quite a lot in the interview skills section of the lectures about the importance of open-ended questions that are exploratory and how closed questions are generally not useful in an interview, but they can be deployed in very specific examples. But we also don't want questions to be confusing. You're going to do lots of this wrong, and that's okay. It's about being able to see it. Researcher role. So this is about appropriately focusing on the participant's perspective and not your own ideas or beliefs. About maintaining boundaries, about not slipping into a friend, problem solver, or counselor role. This can be a bit tricky, so it's good to keep an eye out for this one. Rapport building is about using empathy to develop a positive relationship with the participant, allowing them time to think and not rushing them. And finally, respectful. So this is responding in a respectful and non-judgmental way to the participant. Now, all of these skills have been written in a positive way. So here's the things that we want you to do. But of course, 4 of the skills that you're going to identify in your transcript are when you're not managing to fulfill this skill. So either because you haven't done it and you could have done it, or because in the moment you make a bit of a mess of it. So you're not managing to pull off that skill. Okay, I jump back. So we've asked you to mark on the transcript. So this is what that would look like. So in the first example, this is when you have you could have used a skill, or you should have used a skill. So you'll see I've commented here, I could have oriented this to the specific by asking for an example. So I've identified where the problem is, and I've said, here's an example of what I could have done. If it was the opposite, so I think I did orient to the specific, so you'll see in the example here, I say, can you give me an example of that? And so in the comment I've written, here I orient to the specific by asking for an example. Okay, so you can use the comment function in Word. That's really the easiest thing to do here. If you can't use that, it's fine for you to just insert comments into the text. Okay, so a reminder, identify 8 different skills in total. You'll receive 1 mark for each different skill you appropriately identify and justify. More skills does not mean more marks. So we are only going to mark the first 4 things you did and the first four things you didn't do. So more examples is not going to help you. Here's the marking matrix. So 4 you should and 4 you shouldn't have, and there's a list of the skills. So up until this point, we've had 10 marks, 2 marks for the transcript, 8 marks for the skills. I would like to see everybody getting all of those marks. Okay, I think they're easy marks to get. So the next final task is where the bulk of the marks are, and this is where we're really distinguishing between solid, good, and excellent students. So the first thing to notice is that all of these questions start with reflect. So again, a reminder that this assessment is about reflecting on your performance. It's not about whether you did a good job or not in the interview. So the first question is, reflect on the main actions you took that caused the interview to go well. So a reminder that this assessment is all about interviewing skills. So we're thinking about what skills did you deploy in the interview that meant that the interview went well. So think about what does going well look like? What are we trying to achieve here? So we want a participant who's comfortable. We want them to be expansive in their answers. We don't just want a Q&A session. We want the conversation to be going into unexpected and productive areas. The second one, reflect on the main actions you took or did not take that caused some challenges in the interview. So this might be about thinking about, for example, maybe you weren't very good at probing. And so every time you got an answer to a question, you moved on. So thinking about, well, what have you missed here? What's the consequences of you not using probing as a skill in the interview for the quality of the interview that you've produced? And the final one, reflect on how your existing relationship with the participant enhanced, diminished, or complicated the interview or the interview process. So you're all interviewing somebody you know. You might not know them very well, or it might be someone that you've known for 10 or 15 years. So you have an existing relationship. So we want you to think about how that shaped the interview. So maybe it made the interview easier, maybe it made it more difficult, maybe it made it more complicated, or all of those things. It's not a good or a bad thing. We're just asking you to reflect on it. So for each question, the marks are being given based on you providing a description of the actions that you took or did not take, or about the nature of the relationship and the issue that emerged, evidence or examples you provide from the interview. So that's really important. We're not just going to take your word for it that you were great at something. We want you to be able to point at the transcript and show us evidence of you being good at something, or evidence of you missing the opportunity to do something. We want you to talk about the consequences for the interview or for the interviewee of this issue. So why is the issue important? Why is it a problem that you didn't probe? Why was it a good thing that you did probe? And then if it's relevant, give specific suggestions for how you could have handled this differently. So if you were going to do that interview with that person again, what would you do differently? So all of these questions are reflexive questions. That means they should be written in the first person because it's about your personal insights, your thoughts and feelings. Don't simply describe the interview process, and don't try and give me an objective evaluation. Okay? This is about you reflecting on your own performance. So be fair, but be analytical and critical about your performance in the interview. So this is an opportunity to improve and to learn by really looking at, well, what can I see about what was going well and what wasn't going so well, and how might I change that? Okay, so here's the marking matrix. I'd like you all to get high distinctions here. So that's the bit I've highlighted. So just notice actually, for each of these three reflexive questions, they're very similar kinds of things we're looking for. A thoughtful description of original and relevant issues. So you're able to explain to us what the thing is. Compelling evidence from the interview. So that might be, you might quote something, or you might say on page 4, on the 4th line down, this thing happened. Nuanced and meaningful reflection on the consequences of doing the thing or not doing the thing for the interview or the interviewee. Okay, so you're reflecting on the consequences. Why does it matter? If it's relevant for you to talk about compelling and thoughtful suggestions for mitigating the issue. So what could you have done differently in the moment? Or possibly you think that actually in the moment there's nothing that could have been done differently. This was maybe a problem with the person that you chose to interview. Okay, so that's the marking matrix. So there's lots of useful things on the Canvas page. The full marking matrix is available. We have an FAQ page. I'm going to quick flick to that in a minute. The interview assessment discussion board where you can post queries and I will answer them. If you email me, I'm going to put the answers on that discussion board so to make sure that everybody's getting access to the same guidance. And finally, there's a video on there about things that go wrong during the interview. So this is based on looking back at the interviews that we've seen from students in the past. So while you're not being marked on whether you did a good job in the interview or not, getting some feedback about what things tend to go wrong can be helpful in terms of you thinking about your own performance. Okay, I'm going to quickly jump to so this is the discussion board on Canvas. No questions yet, unsurprisingly. And this is the FAQ page. So so I'll just start on this page actually. So this is the bottom of assessment 3 guidance. So all of the information I've just given you, but it's written down. And then there's a whole bunch of resources down here at the bottom. So there's the interview schedule that you're going to use. There's a transcription template that you're going to use. There's a list of the skills. And then there's the FAQ, the marking matrix, and the discussion board. So the FAQs, these are basically kind of regular questions that we tend to get asked. Almost everything that you want to know has already been asked before, so the answer should be here. So have a look. One of the important things to note here is this question about interviewing someone who's not a native English speaker. So there is an added burden for students who are interviewing someone who either English is not their first language or where you decide to do the interview in a different language. So that's fine. You work with whatever is best for you and the participant. And often it means actually it's easier to interview, it's easier to get a better flow going. So I'd encourage you to do that. But I recognize that it means that you have an added burden because you have to translate as well as transcribe. So please make a note at the beginning of the transcription, if this is the case for you, so we can take into account the fact that you've done that added work and that there might also be some issues where it looks like there's some errors in the transcript, but we understand what it is that's going on. I think that's probably anyway. There's lots of helpful things in the FAQs section, so have a look at them. So look at the FAQs. You've watched this video. Check the marking matrix to really assess your own work before you submit it, and make sure, most importantly, that the 3 sections where you're getting marks, make sure that you've done that work and that it's in the thing that you're submitting, and use the discussion board if you've got any questions. Thank you.